In every corner of medieval Europe, from the mist-crowned highlands of Scotland to the sun-bleached fortresses of Iberia, castles rose like silent witnesses of an age shaped by war, devotion, fear, and ambition. They appear today as ruins, weathered stones draped in moss, empty windows staring out over forgotten fields. But in their time, they were living organs of power. Men and women moved through their halls with purpose, carrying out duties so ordinary that history rarely recorded them. Yet within these same walls, far from the eyes of peasants and chroniclers, lay rituals, secrets, and practices that few outside the noble class ever came to understand. What follows is not a tale of fantasy nor an embellished legend. It is a reconstruction of what contemporary records, archaeological evidence, monastic archives, and feudal documents reveal about the lesser-known, often hidden side of castle life. These secrets were never meant to be sung by minstrels or carved into stone. They lingered in shadows, whispered through generations, until time buried them beneath layers of dust and caution. Today, we lift that dust, not to sensationalize the past, but to understand the world as it truly was: complex, brutal, ingenious, and strangely human. Every medieval castle was first and foremost a machine of survival. Its architecture reflected not just military strategy, but the anxieties of its inhabitants. It is no coincidence, then, that many fortresses concealed passageways unknown even to the common soldiers stationed there. Across England, France, and the German principalities, archaeologists have uncovered tunnels that ran beneath baileys, curtain walls, and keeps. Some were built intentionally during construction. Others were expanded hastily during sieges. Chroniclers from the 12th and 13th centuries mention these sally ports, narrow, easily defensible exits allowing knights to launch surprise attacks on besiegers or attempt an escape where provisions ran thin. One of the most striking examples is the tunnel beneath Dover Castle, which winds down toward the cliffs. In France, the Château de Chinon contains a similar passage, its walls narrow and unadorned, revealing its purpose, not grandeur, but secrecy. These tunnels were designed for speed, silence, and deception. Their ceilings were low, forcing men to move in a single file. Their curves were deliberate, slowing invaders who might attempt to follow. But not all hidden passages served military purposes. Some led to chapels, allowing lords to pray unseen, especially during periods of political turmoil, when an ill-timed religious display could be interpreted as weakness. Others connected private chambers, enabling clandestine meetings, discreet movements of servants, or, in rare cases, the concealment of guests whose presence could spark conflict. These passageways speak to a truth often forgotten, that medieval lords feared betrayal from within just as much as threats from beyond the walls. The term murder hole may sound dramatic, but medieval masons and engineers approached their design with cold precision. Known in Latin as meurtriere, these openings were cut into ceilings over entrance passages, especially gatehouses. Their purpose was not to kill outright, although that happened, but to disable, disrupt, or discourage attackers trying to break through the most vulnerable point of any fortress, the gate. Contrary to popular belief, defenders rarely poured molten metal through these holes. The temperatures required to melt iron or lead were not practical during sieges. What they actually used, according to both the Angevin household manuals and multiple 13th century siege treatises, were boiling water, heated sand capable of slipping under armor plates, stones, spears, heavy timber beams. The psychological effect was as powerful as the physical one. Imagine entering a long, narrow tunnel only to realize defenders stood invisibly above you, ready to strike from angles impossible to see. Castle gatehouses often incorporated additional traps, false doors, angled passages, and reinforced inner gates. At Bodiam Castle in England, researchers found that the main entrance was designed as a theatrical deception, grand enough to impress, but constructed to funnel attackers into a deadly gauntlet of arrows and boiling liquids. These features remind us that castles were not passive structures. They were designed to think, to anticipate, to manipulate the flow of battle. Few topics evoke as much fascination today as the so-called dungeons and torture chambers of medieval castles. Movies and novels have painted them as chambers filled with spiked coffins, racks, and elaborate metal devices gleaming in torchlight. Yet the historical record tells a different story. The infamous Iron Maiden, for example, did not exist in the Middle Ages. It was a 19th century myth created during a period of romanticized medievalism. Likewise, many devices displayed in modern museums were constructed centuries after the era they claimed to represent. So, what did castles actually use? Documents from the Tower of London, the Papal States, and several Germanic bishoprics reveal that interrogation methods, while brutal, were far simpler and relied largely on restraints and chains, stress positions, deprivation, sleep, food, light, water immersion or cold exposure, public humiliation. Severe mechanical torture existed, but it was not common, and it was rarely conducted inside castles themselves. Royal courts preferred swift punishments, imprisonment, exile, or execution over elaborate cruelty. Torture was more often associated with inquisitorial procedures in urban centers than with aristocratic strongholds. Castles did, however, contain underground holding cells, often called oubliettes, a French term meaning to forget. These were narrow pits accessed from the ceiling. A prisoner lowered inside could not lie down, stand fully, or see light. Surviving such confinement for more than a few days was nearly impossible. Still, even these grim chambers were used sparingly. Noble status often protected prisoners from harsh treatment. In many cases, high-ranking captives were housed in comfortable rooms, allowed servants, and even granted wine during negotiations. The truth is less theatrical, but far more revealing. Medieval punishment was not designed for spectacle. It was designed for control. One of the least discussed aspects of medieval castle life is the presence of narrow service corridors, spy holes, and listening vents embedded into walls. These were not myths. They appear in architectural surveys of castles from Portugal to Poland. Feudal lords relied on information more than armies. A whispered plot could topple a dynasty faster than a siege engine. Thus, private chambers were often designed with deliberate acoustics. Certain walls were hollow, allowing sound to travel. Small slits, hidden behind tapestries or carved tracery, enabled guards to observe conversations without being detected. At Leap Castle in Ireland, one such opening overlooks the Great Hall, while at Wartburg Castle in Thuringia, a concealed passage allowed guards to move silently between floors. These features were not traps. They were tools of governance. Spying was not considered dishonorable. It was a necessity. Despite the strong influence of the church, medieval life was steeped in superstition. Castles were no exception. Lords and soldiers alike held beliefs that blended Christian symbolism with older pre-Christian traditions. Archaeological digs have uncovered protective charms buried beneath thresholds, including dried animal hearts, wax figures, iron knives placed crosswise, carved runes, burn marks meant to ward off spirits. Some castles contained small alcoves used as prayer cells, where chaplains performed quiet rituals intended to bless weapons or protect the garrison from disease. These rites rarely appear in written records, not because they were forbidden, but because they were considered mundane. Yet there were practices that chroniclers mentioned cautiously, if at all. Several 14th century manuscripts describe nobles who sought guidance from astrologers before battles. Others warn of shadow rites, private masses held after midnight, meant to invoke divine favor. These remnants suggest that even in an age dominated by religious authority, fear and uncertainty shaped belief in ways modern readers might not expect. Assassination through poison was not as common as fiction suggests, but the fear of it colored every aspect of noble life. Royal households employed tasters, trained servants who sampled each dish before it reached the Lord. Silver plates were favored not because they changed color when poisoned, a misconception, but because they were easier to clean and disinfect. Some castles developed specific procedures. Certain foods were prepared only in supervised kitchens. Wine casks were sealed with wax, bearing the Lord's signet. Herbs considered dangerous were stored separately. Servants who handled spices were often searched or monitored. The fear ran so deep that many lords preferred to dine in small private chambers, far from the noise and vulnerability of the Great Hall. This secrecy around food safety reveals a deeper truth. Power in the medieval world was fragile. Even behind walls, danger lurked in the simplest daily rituals. While common criminals might be thrown into dungeons, noble captives were treated according to their rank. They were held in honor rooms, upper chambers with windows, fireplaces, and beds. But such treatment did not mean comfort. These rooms were locked, guarded, and often positioned in towers where escape was impossible. Some towers gained reputations so dark that later generations refused to enter them. The Tour de Constance in France is one example. Its upper rooms once held individuals deemed politically dangerous. Many castles had similar spaces, often sealed after a notorious death or an unsolved disappearance. Archaeological teams have found rooms abandoned since the 15th century, their doors still barred, their interiors eerily preserved. They stand as reminders that silence, not violence, was often the greatest punishment. Medieval people understood little about microbes, but they recognized the contagious nature of illness. During outbreaks of plague or sweating sickness, castle inhabitants practiced early forms of quarantine. Guest rooms near outer gates were used to isolate travelers. Servants placed food on the floor outside the threshold rather than passing it by hand. Smoke rituals, intended to purify the air, filled corridors with the scent of burning herbs. In some castles, small chambers near the postern gate served as temporary enclosures for sick individuals, structures sometimes mistaken today for prison cells. Their purpose was practical, not punitive, protecting the household. This willingness to sacrifice comfort for safety reveals how intimately medieval life was tied to fear of the unseen. Many castles maintained close ties with nearby monasteries, which kept detailed chronicles of regional wars, land disputes, and noble lineages. Yet, some entries were written in guarded language, hinting at scandals, betrayals, or spiritual crises that could not be openly acknowledged. Fragments of these documents survive, torn pages bearing cryptic notes, marginalia referencing secret negotiations, or descriptions of omens preceding conflict. These are rare but powerful glimpses into the hidden emotional landscape of feudal society. A castle was not merely a military outpost, it was a center of administration, diplomacy, judgment, and at times, confession. As the sun set behind the walls, the castle changed. Doors were bolted, torches dimmed, footsteps softened. The night brought a different rhythm, one that favored caution over activity. Night watchers followed strict routines, walking prescribed routes, checking gate bolts and arrow slits, listening for movement in stables, observing the horizon for unexpected fires. These routines rarely appear in chronicles, yet they define the lived experience of thousands. Night in a castle was not peaceful. It was a time when fears sharpened, when shadows stretched long across corridors, when any sound might signal danger. The dark secrets of castles often began here, in the quiet hours when most slept, but some listened. In several European castles, archaeologists have discovered sealed doorways leading to small chambers untouched for centuries. Most contain nothing more sinister than debris or collapsed masonry, but a few yielded unsettling scenes. Furniture left in place, chests unopened, and in one Belgian fortress, a room containing children's shoes neatly arranged along a wall. Records rarely explain these closures. Some may have been abandoned after plague outbreaks. Others perhaps carried memories of deaths or betrayals that successors wished to forget. While we cannot assign meaning where the evidence is silent, these sealed rooms remind us that medieval people, like us, grappled with grief, fear, and the weight of memory. The medieval castle, in all its stone permanence, was a world of contradictions. It projected strength, yet concealed vulnerability. It upheld law, yet hid practices that blurred the boundary between justice and necessity. It offered refuge, but fostered suspicion. It was sacred and profane, magnificent and frightening, open to the sun, yet full of darkness. To explore its secrets is not to judge the past, but to understand the people who built and inhabited these structures, people driven by survival, loyalty, ambition, and faith. The stones that remain today are only the shell. The true castle lived in the rituals, fears, and whispered truths now scattered through chronicles and ruins. Even now, when you walk through an abandoned gatehouse or stand before a weathered tower, you may feel the weight of those secrets. They are not loud. They do not cry out. They linger in cool corridors, in the echo of your footsteps, in the stillness that settles when the wind dies. And it is in that silence that the medieval world speaks most clearly. If tonight's journey brought you a moment of calm or a spark of curiosity, you're always welcome to wander these stories again. There will be more tales waiting here, quiet histories, forgotten paths, and gentle echoes from the past. Whenever your evening calls for a peaceful escape, you know where to find me. Rest well, traveler.